When it comes to halal property investing in the UK and making money from property in a Sharia compliant way, is it even possible? I certainly believe it is, and in this video I'm going to share with you 3 methods. If you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing journey. When it comes to investing in a halal and compliant way, what does that actually even mean? Well, essentially what we want to do, we want to be able to do transactions related to property and make money from property that does not involve any interest within any of those transactions. Now, really, it's quite simple when you look at it from that point of view, but some people make it very complex. And over the years, there's lots of different ways I've done deals, and there's people that I've spoken to who've come to me with structures that are very complex in terms of how they're setting it up and how they're phrasing certain things. And ultimately, I believe if you're trying to play with the words in terms of what you're trying to achieve, the reality is it comes down to what's in your heart, what your intention is, or what you're trying to do. If you're trying to stay away from interest and riba within a transaction, then that's the way you need to be thinking about it from the offset, not how do you take an interest-bearing transaction and then convert it and make it look like it's got no interest in it. Because ultimately it's between you and the creator and the universe in terms of what it is that you're trying to achieve and who is it that you're trying to convince. So many people will invest in this way because it's an ethical way of investing. It doesn't involve any kind of interest in a transaction. And it's not just Muslims that are interested in doing business in this particular way. There's many people that aren't Muslims that also want to get involved in transactions that are considered much more ethical in their approach. But how do we do this in property? It's such a difficult thing to try and be able to do. How can we do this within the UK in a compliant way? Method number 1 is what I call creative control concepts. And essentially what that means is rather than acquiring property, i.e. owning the property, what you do is use techniques to control the property to make money from it. So let me explain a little bit more about what I mean. In fact, there's a number of different ways this can be done. Let's give one example. Firstly, it could be what we call rent to rent. Rent to rent essentially is the idea of taking a property on from a landlord and then usually re-letting it, but increasing the income that it generates. So how could you do that? Well, in a simple term, for example, it might be a family house that you turn into a HMO and you rent that out. So for example, it might be you're renting the property from a landlord at £1,000. You're then creating 6 rooms that you let out individually. They generate, say, £450 each. So the 6 rooms gives you £2,700 a month. Then from that £2,700, you've got to pay the £1,000 to the landlord. You've got a few £100 of cost, let's say it's £700, and you're left with about £1,000 of profit. Now in that transaction, you're generating £1,000 a month on an ongoing basis, but you don't own any property, but it's done in a halal and compliant way. Another control technique that I've really utilized over the last 15 years is what we call option contracts or lease option contracts. Some people also know them as purchase lease option. And essentially what you're doing, earlier on we were talking about rent to rent, but you're controlling a property essentially by leasing it. In a lease option, what we're doing is adding on the ability to be able to buy it. So what that means is we're leasing a property and attaching a right to buy at some point in the future. So for example, the one I talked about earlier on where you're leasing it for £1,000 a month, it may be that you've agreed a purchase price of say £200,000 at any time, say in the next 5 years. That means now you've got the ability to be able to purchase that property. But you're thinking, hang on a minute, how am I going to purchase it and be able to stay away from interest? Well, what you could actually do, you can add value to that property. You can improve the profitability, for example, by turning it into HMO as we spoke about. You might get planning permission to change what you're doing with it to something else, and that improves the value of the property. Although you've got the right to purchase it at £200,000, you could push the value up to 250. So that right you could sell to somebody else and extract that £50,000 profit. Now the way we're doing that is just by controlling, and again, we're not actually owning the property. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, I'd like to ask a quick favor, and that's to hit the subscribe button just so that you can see more great content just like this. It also helps me out because YouTube will show this content to more people, but the great news is it actually is absolutely free. So hit that subscribe button and let's get back to the video. As I mentioned, there's many ways to do this. Let me give you a third example of how you can control a property and make money from it. So we call this sourcing or packaging deals. What we do, we go out and look for fantastic property investment opportunities, and then we look to sell those on to somebody else who might be looking for a certain type of property. So for instance, it may be a property that's, say, slightly cheaper than the market value. Let's say it's a £100,000 property, and we've secured a deal directly with the seller for £80,000. That means that we're purchasing that property or have the right to buy that property for £80,000, £20,000 below what we believe is the market value. We can then sell that whole opportunity without purchasing the property to somebody else who will pay us a fee of £2,000, £3,000, £5,000, because remember, they're still making £20,000 even after paying your fee. That could still be £15,000 that they're going to make day one on that property, because you found and negotiated a great deal, but then you managed the process, or the packaging as we call it. In that scenario, essentially what you're doing is acting a little bit like an estate agent, but rather than the person selling the property paying your fee, what you're actually doing is generating a fee from the person that's buying the property. Here, what you're doing is very similar to what an estate agent would do, but rather than charging a fee to the seller of the property, what you're doing is charging a fee to the buyer of the property, i.e. the one that's going to be buying this deal from you. That's 3 examples of how you can control a property and make money from it without even touching interest anywhere within that transaction. As I said, there's so many different ways to do this. They're just 3 examples. But you might be thinking right now, yeah, that's all well and good. You're making money from property, but I want to own the assets. But if you want to own assets in this country, then you need to pay for those. So how do we get that money without having any interest in that transaction? Well, the way that I've built my business over the years and the way I've transitioned from sourcing in terms of owning of assets was to start partnering with other people who effectively become joint venture partners or business partners within the transaction. So for instance, let's say you've got a great deal that you found. Let's use the example we talked about earlier on, where you've got an £80,000 property you've sourced. Now you partner with somebody else who brings in the cash. So it's not your money, it's other money somebody else is bringing in that they're putting into the deal. So they're putting in £80,000 into that to purchase it. And you're thinking, maybe what's in it for them? Why would they do that? Well, there's many reasons why somebody would do that. You're effectively using your skill and expertise to find these deals, to structure the deals, to oversee the purchase, to deal with any works, to tenant it, to manage it, to oversee a sale. Whatever it might be, you're using your time, skill and experience to make this happen. That's how we built our business, and we will partner with people who put the funds in, and then we come up with an arrangement that is fair for everybody in terms of how we share the profit. Now, for it to be completely halal in that transaction, you're not using money that has any interest in that transaction. So that's their own money that might have. It could be savings, it could be inheritance, it could be money that they've got from a sale of a business. Many of the people that tend to work with me tend to be high earning professionals, solicitors, doctors, pilots, people that are earning high salaries, very busy, and what they want to do is build portfolios and properties for the long term, but they don't necessarily have the time and skill to do it. And essentially partnering with people like that means you can utilize cash, but it's not your cash, and now you've got a piece of the pie and you're starting to own assets rather than just control them. Now you might be thinking, well, actually that's all well and good, but I don't necessarily want to work with somebody else. I don't want somebody else to have a piece of the pie. I really want to own all of it myself. Well, then the third method that you can use is using mortgages that are considered to be halal in terms of their structure and how they're put together. Effectively, the way they're different from normal interest-bearing mortgages is what happens is they purchase the property on your behalf effectively. There's different ways how these deals are structured, and they agree to sell it to you for a price that might be higher, essentially some profit for them. And during that time, you're paying them a rent and a little bit towards that price. So ultimately, you're chipping down the price just like you would with a mortgage payment in terms of what you owe to the bank. And at the end of it, the property effectively becomes all yours with no debt left on it. Very similar to how a mortgage works. Now, the thing with this is there's many different views on how halal they are. Are they actually Sharia compliant? You get different fatwas from different people in terms of yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do that. There's also the argument, money, the way it works and distributes around the world, there's always going to be places where it's going to get touched by interest at some point, somewhere along the line. So really, this is a personal decision for you to make, whether that's something you're comfortable with. And in the UK, there isn't really a huge amount of choice, although we're quite advanced when it comes to Islamic finance in the UK. When it comes to Western Islamic finance, we're still quite limited and we're in our infancy in terms of the amount of products and what's available to us. So there's a couple of banks that really offer these products. You've got Gatehouse Bank, which is a fairly new player, and then you've also got Al Rayyan Bank, which was formerly known as the Islamic Bank of Britain. They've been around for a little bit of time, but now their products are quite limited in terms of choice and what you want and what type of products you might be able to buy, use their finance to be able to purchase. And there are also some specialist bridging lenders that structure a deal in a profit share basis rather than an interest basis. So it is possible to structure some kind of finance. It's not the cheapest way, so you need to understand that. If you're going to try and compare it with mainstream finance, I can tell you now it's going to be more expensive. But people that make a decision to use this type of finance are not doing it because it's cheaper. They're doing it because it fits in with their values and their faith in terms of what it is they're ultimately trying to achieve. So as you can see, if you get creative in your thinking, there's actually many different ways that you can invest in property and make money from property in the UK in a halal and compliant way. However, many people tend to have a very narrow approach in terms of how they think about this and are quite limited in terms of what they think they can do. The reality is there's many different ways. I've barely scratched the surface in this video. If you'd like to learn more about working with me, the way we could do that in terms of a partnership would be a profit share. And to work with me on a profit share basis, you need to have at least £350,000 and be classed as a high net worth individual or a sophisticated investor for us to explore how we can do that on a partnership basis. If you do want to reach out to me to discuss that further, we'll put a link in the description below that you can follow for us to set up a call and have that conversation. If you'd like to learn more about some of the creative control concepts I talk about, then we're going to put a playlist just here for you to watch. But just before you do that, make sure you click on my face down here to subscribe to the channel to get more content just like this. And I'll see you over here on this playlist.